hobbits and hawks. Each week as a church we have teaching from the Bible, and like any good hobbit, we are starting a journey away from familiar territory into unfamiliar territory. We're going to be exploring the book of Deuteronomy, which is the 5th book in the Bible, and it's a series of speeches given by Moses to the people before he dies. And in true Sesame Street fashion, the word of today is loyalty. That's what Moses is going to be talking to us today as we're going to read from the book. And I find this excruciatingly challenging because there's just so much good in this. I feel like we should just stay here for hours and just read this aloud together and just allow God to speak to us. And one of the most painful parts of the privilege of preaching is learning what not to say, because there's so many good things to say, but time is of the essence because we have our Sunday lunches. But like any good hawk, we're instead going to be kind of overviewing the terrain of Deuteronomy and then pouncing in every so often to land on some key themes and draw them out. And today's theme is loyalty. We're going to be reading from chapter 4. Now, chapter 4, again, just contains so many juicy bits for us. It's quoted dozens of times in the Old Testament and at least 10 times in the New Testament. Just this chapter alone, there's so much good in it. What I've done for you is I've pulled out some of the juiciest nuggets from the chapter, and we're going to read. It's a 5-minute reading from the book, from chapter 4 of Deuteronomy, and I'm going to read it to you, and we're going to sit under it and see what God has to say to us. Because this isn't just an exercise in after-dinner speeches. We've had our coffee and our breakfast, and now I'm going to deliver a talk. This is us as a community now, sitting under God's word and saying, shape us. That word about boldness, shape us as we step out boldly into all the things that you've called us to. So prepare your hearts, get ready, because the word of God is going to come and smack you between the eyes. So Moses is standing before the people, and he delivers this speech. And now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the rules that I'm teaching you, and do them that you may live, and go in and take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of our fathers, is giving you. You shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you. Your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor, for the Lord your God destroyed from among you all the men who followed the Baal of Peor, that is a false god. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today. See, I have taught you statutes and rules as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do them in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him? And what great nation is there that has statutes and rules so righteous as all the law that I set before you today? Only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children, how on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, the mountain burned with fire to the heart of heaven, wrapped in darkness, cloud, and gloom. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully. Since you saw no form on the day that the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire, beware lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, or the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the sea. Beware lest you bow down to them and serve them. But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace of Egypt to be a people of his own inheritance, as you are this day. Take care lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made for you. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. When you father children and children's children, and have grown old in the land, if you act corruptly by making a carved image in the form of anything, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will soon utterly perish from the land that you are going over to possess. You will not live long in it, but will be utterly destroyed. And the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord will drive you. And there you will serve gods of wood and stone, the work of human hands that neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. But from there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you search after him with your heart, with all your heart and with all your soul. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not leave you or destroy you or forget the covenant with your fathers that he swore to them. For ask now of the days that are past, which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth, and ask from one end of heaven to the other whether such a great thing as this has ever happened or was ever heard of. Did any people ever hear the voice of a God speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and still live? Or has any God ever attempted to go and take a nation for himself, but from the midst of another nation, by trials, by signs, by wonders, and by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great deeds of terror, all of which the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord is God. There is no other besides him. Therefore you shall keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, and that you may prolong your days in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for all time. This is God's word. Moses drops mic and walks down mountain. Like, what a great speech! Just incredible. God is not a God invented by human hands. No God comes up with a God like this. There's so much good in it. So, here's a question. Where were you 40 years ago? What happened 40 years ago? Cast your mind back. Many of you weren't alive. In fact, as I sat down and I thought, what happened 40 years ago? That was so long ago. And then I realized, I was born. No, not quite. I'm 39, nearly. So I thought, oh my goodness, 40 years ago is not that long ago, is it? It's like yesterday. 40 years ago, where were you? Here's a few things that happened in this year or this day, 40 years ago. Ozzy Osbourne bit the head off a bat live on stage. Michael Jackson released his album Thriller. The film E.T. was out. So yes, some trivial things happened. But also some more, this is interesting. This man, I can't remember his name now, this man ascended to 11,000 feet with just helium balloons and a plastic patio chair. I don't know, anybody, those of you who are alive, do you remember that? Does anyone remember that event? John does. Come on, is that what inspired you to get into gliding? Fascinating. So some trivial things happened 40 years ago, but some significant things happened as well. Prince William was born. Yes, he turns 40 in June of this year. And the Falklands War happened 40 years ago. But I do all of that because Moses is standing before a people and he says to them, 40 years ago, this happened. And he gets them to cast their mind back to the time that they, as the Israelites, gathered around the foot of Mount Sinai and Horeb. And the mountain thundered, and fire burned it up, and smoke consumed it, and it was a sight of terror. And they stayed gathered around this mountain for up to a year, as Moses was up the mountain receiving God's instructions to him, as the people gathered around the mountain, and they said to God, "Don't speak to us anymore, or we'll die." They beheld the holy, glorious God in fire on the mountain. And Moses is saying, that happened just 40 years ago. And when significant and serious events happen, we hold them before our hearts and our minds, don't we? Some of them. Those of you who've been married for 40 years or longer, that moment in time, that commitment changed the trajectory of your life. When you have children, it changes the trajectory of your life. When you move house or you move country, you get a new job, certain events are significant for us, and they change us. They change how we live. When I became a Christian, my entire life trajectory changed. I had, up until that point, planned what I was going to do, and suddenly I became a Christian. The impact of Jesus' death on the cross hit me, and I realized all of my plans go out the window. I mean, I may get to keep them, but they go out the window as far as this is concerned. Because if this happened, if God thundered at Horeb, if Christ came on the cross, then everything in your life needs to orient itself around that moment. And if it didn't happen, forget it. Go home. You're being deceived. Run away. But if it did happen, everything in your life needs to be factored around this. As Isaac Watts' hymn put it, were the whole realm of nature mine, it was an offering far too small when I consider what he did. Or as Jesus put it, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who finds treasure hidden in a field, and in his joy, he sells everything he has just to be near that treasure. He buys the field so that he's close to it. Moses sees the significance of this moment in defining this people, and he tells them, he gives them these speeches to them in light of it. Therefore, this is how you live. And these are verses here. Verse 7, don't know what that is. Verse 7, for what great nation is there that has a God as near to it as Yahweh our God is near to us whenever we call on him? Who is there in the world that can say that? Our God is this near. Or as he puts it again in verse 32, ask of it, what has anything like this ever happened before? Has a God ever done what he's done with us? He says, through trials and through war, he's gone into another nation and claimed a people for himself. And that's what God has done for the Israelites. That's what God has done for you. Us, a group of people made up of people from different nations all across the planet. He's reached into those nations, your family histories, and he's pulled you to himself. What great God is there? Drops mic, walks off mountain. This is phenomenal. Moments like that need to define a people. They do define a people. People have asked me in the last couple of years who weren't Christians, they said, if I become a Christian, what happens tomorrow? What do I do the moment I wake up? What religious observances do I have to keep? You know, for Muslims, they've got their pillars, they've got their daily prayer they have to do. What do you do? Buddha's given me the 4 spiritual laws. Wim Hof has given me his technique. The vegans give me a strict dietary no. They all give me something. What does Jesus give me if I come to Jesus? That's a good question, I think. What does the Bible actually say about what you should do tomorrow morning when you wake up, having become a Christian? We add things. We say, well, it's a good practice, and the Christians have always gone to church every Sunday. You should do that. You should have communion once a week. That's good for you. We do that, but what does the Bible say you must do? And herein lies something that's fascinating, that the Bible reveals a God who's not interested in religion. Okay, religion is man's attempt to get to God through doing things. I do spiritual laws, practices, I avoid meat, I do whatever I can, I breathe in certain ways, I meditate to get to God. That's religion. Christianity instead reveals a God that came to us. And in that sense, Christianity is not in the paradigm of religion. Do this, get to God. Instead, it's in the paradigm of relationship. He's come to you. Now, orient your life around this fact. You know, the question, what do I do the day after I become a Christian, needs to be answered then within that paradigm of relationship. You know, it's more like saying, what do I do the day after marrying this woman or this man? What happens the next day? To which the answer is, well, you learn to live together. Or in my case, you have to throw out all of those stupid things you had as a bachelor and now make room for this person who cares about our house looking clean and tidy and pretty and nice. And it was a pain. It was an inconvenience. I had to take down my film posters and put my dinosaurs in a cupboard, and I never got to put them on display again. Eventually I got a shed in the garden. I was allowed to put my things there. It was a pain. But I did it because I had the pleasure of Amy is coming to live with me. Now my entire life is now devoted to this new reality, this paradigm of relationship. And Moses is saying, God has come to us. He has saved us as a people. Now, let's learn to live with a holy God. And he is a holy God. And you are not a holy people by nature. And so you, therefore, it doesn't come naturally to learn how to live. Therefore, the enemies of the Christian life are the same enemies as the enemies of a healthy marriage. Apathy and infidelity. Or, as the Bible puts it, lukewarmness and idolatry. Being half-hearted about Jesus kills the Christian life, kills a church. Or being devoted to things other than Jesus, worshipping false gods, kills the Christian life, kills a church. It's like a rot inside, and it's not obvious to anyone. We don't have statues of Buddha on the wall, but in our hearts, we start to devote ourselves to things other than Jesus. And over time, the edge goes. We lose the Lord because he's a jealous God, as we read, and he won't allow us to have mixed motives and mixed devotions. And that's why Moses urges them with our word of the day, is by saying to them, be loyal to this God. And that chapter 4 in large part is him saying, be loyal to this God. There's never happened before in history that a God's done this. He's so near to us, therefore be loyal to him. And I appreciate my octaves are going up because I can't contain my excitement about this chapter. So forgive me. So the question then that we're going to pose and look to answer together in the next few minutes is how? How do we be loyal to this God? And he begins by saying, are you listening? Are you listening? In the first verse of chapter 4, he says this, and now, O Israel, listen, listen to the statutes and the rules that I am telling you. Listen. Now, we live in a wild world that is constantly in need of taming. In just a few weeks' time, spring will have sprung and all of our paths will have been overgrown with weeds. We live in a wild world where governments corrupt, relationships break down, pandemics are unleashed on the world, disease ravages communities. We live in a wild world, and in this wild and untamed world, life begins when we listen to God. This past week, I had the privilege of meeting a man named Sam Orker, who's one of the best plastic surgeons in the country and also an elder at a church in East Grinstead. And I was asking this question, how do you pursue excellence in the workplace and excellence among the people of God? How do you spin plates like that? And he said, for me, I need to listen to God to know what he's called me to do. To know that he's called me to be both an elder and a plastic surgeon. So he's turned down opportunities to run hospitals and advance in career because he's listening to what God has called him specifically to do. How are you at listening to what God has called you to do, the lane that he's given you to run in? Oh, I know we're all very good at listening to what God's told other people to do and thinking, oh, maybe I should do what they're doing. But what's he told you to do, and how faithfully are you doing it? And just as a sidebar, how good are we as a church at listening to God? Because let's not forget, this book is not aimed primarily at individual Israelites going, I must fulfill my personal destiny like a modern Westerner. No, there are a communal people who think in terms of community. So he's saying to them as a community, we must listen. Everything that he's about to teach them is applied to them as a community. So the question is, how good are we at doing that? How do we do that? And it's partly why our sermons are significant, because we're trying to listen to what God is speaking to us week by week. It's partly why, again, our prayer meetings are so significant. And I'd encourage you to come if you're ever able. We have prayer meetings every week, Wednesday morning at 7:30 till 8:30, followed by bacon and egg across the road, if that's a nice little hook. Every Wednesday morning, come and join us. Every Sunday morning, 8:30. Every Friday mid-morning, every Friday evening. We've got different settings going on where we're gathering to pray, to be a people who listen. So we can say this is what God's calling us to do now. Life begins when we listen to God. But listening to God, of course, involves and brings with it obedience to God, doesn't it? When I tell my kids, listen, what I'm really saying is, obey me, do as you're told. And actually the Latin origin of the word listen is ordia, from where we get the word obey. Obedience and listening are bound up together. So Moses says to them, listen to the statutes and the rules that I'm teaching you and do them. The mark that you've listened to God is that you're doing the things that God has called you to do. It's not enough to go, yeah, I heard him. I'm just going to carry on doing what I want. No, we do what God has called us to do. And he says the reason I'm telling you this isn't like a religious person so that you can get to God. He says, listen to them that you may live. Listen to what God says, do what God says, so that you may live. Moses' desire for the people is that they live. And who could argue with that? That's what we want, isn't it? We want to live. I want to live as fruitful a life as I can. Life, fruitful life, I was about to sing then, oh life, begins by listening and obeying God. And this is not like a, oh yeah, we know, move on. Oh, we're living in a culture that is constantly saying, do this and you'll live, do that and you'll live, obey this and you'll live, express your inner self and you'll live. Whereas Moses says, listen to God, obey him, and you'll live. You'll find life. I mean, don't get me wrong, when you've got a limp, walking is never easy, and spiritually speaking, we've got a lot more than a limp. So doing the right thing doesn't feel comfortable. Obeying God doesn't feel comfortable, but Moses says, this is how you'll live. Listening to God leads to life. And bizarrely, or maybe not bizarrely, I read a book from a sociologist recently who said that they have found this, right? That from age 20, they have discovered that weekly involvement in a community of faith, a church, across your lifetime increases your life expectancy by 7 years. Amen. We'll take that. It's true. Belonging to the people of God, obeying God, adds fruitfulness to your life. We think, duh, like this is how God's made us to be as part of his people. Anyway, right. So he says, listen to the statutes and the rules that I'm teaching you and do them that you may live. And then he says, and go in and take possession of the land that Yahweh, the God of your fathers, has given you. So he says, listen, do, live, go. And actually, those four things, those four ideas are very similar to how Matthew ends his gospel. Jesus appears to them on a mountain, similar, and he says to them, go into all the world and teach them to obey. They'll listen and obey all that I've commanded you. But he says to them, go. And actually those four things are a nice little helpful summary of what the Christian life is meant to be. Listen, do, live, go. God has given you purpose. He's given you mission. He's given us as a people a mission, as a community, but as individual households, he's given you a mission. What's the purpose of your marriage? What's the purpose of your friendships? Have you ever sat down and gone, what's the purpose of this? Again, culture would tell you the purpose is personal contentment. Rubbish, that's a small thing to live for. Personal contentment. I want something bigger than that. Jesus offers you a mission of global transformation. Our marriages are meant to be vehicles of individual fruitfulness, yes, sanctification, being made more like Jesus, being made holy, but also purpose and intention. So loyalty to God looks like listening, doing, living, and going. And this idea is as old as the Bible. And the oldest book in the Bible, the book of Job, sums up Job's life by saying that he was a good man because he feared God and he shunned evil, those two things. Feared God, obeyed God. And then the wisdom book of Ecclesiastes says similarly. He says after reviewing life, he says really life comes down to this. Fear God and keep his commandments. It's easy. Fear God, keep his commandments. It's simple, but it's not easy, is it? It's really not. If you've tried living as a Christian for anything longer than a few hours, you'll know it's not easy. Simple, but it's not easy. And that is really why Moses spends a lot of the chapter that we read out talking to them about idolatry. And he says to them, at the mountain when God spoke to you, you didn't see any form. Nothing, there was no kind of image. Therefore, be very careful that you don't make an image, an idol, and say that that's God. And he says it, and we go, okay, yeah, I get it. But then he labors it, doesn't he? He says, and if you any winged thing, don't do any winged thing. And no, don't do a man or a woman. Don't make an image out of anything that creeps on the floor. Don't make an image out of a fish. And you're like, well, we get it. You said it. And now you're just repeating it and saying, oh, what about this? He knows that the human heart is an idol factory. The human heart is an idol factory. And we are desperately longing for something physical to worship, to bow down to this that's tangible and I can hold it and taste it. And so he has to spell it out for them. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. And actually then he goes on to say, when you do this, because he knows that they will. And actually he gives us kind of a catalogue, a mini overview summary of the Old Testament story. The people of God were married to Yahweh, devoted to him, and then strayed off after other gods. But God is merciful and so never abandoned them. That's the story of the Bible in a nutshell, folks. And that's actually the story of humanity in a nutshell. Because Israel is really a picture of the human race. So everything he's telling to Israel here, and everything that Israel is trying to implement, he could really just be saying to you and to me, to every human being alive. You see, for the Israelites, they heard him say, don't make an idol out of anything. And they would have stood there going, easy. That is easy. That's like the simplest thing in the world. Okay, like we've just seen the mountain on fire. I'm going to worship that God forever. Whoever that God is, that's the real God. And then when times get tough, they think to themselves, what is the greatest superpower of our day? Or which nation has the greatest technology? Which nation is best at finance? Or which nation is the most powerful in war? And they go, Egypt. What is it about Egypt that made them so good? Oh, well, Egypt, they harnessed the power of the sun for their crops. They worship it. Maybe we should worship the sun. And they go, well, or when a neighboring army comes against them, they think, who's got the strongest army? Egypt. How did they get it? They worship this falcon god. Maybe we should worship the falcon god. And so you can see how it happens. And we do the same. We look at our neighbors or our friends and we go, they're so successful. They're so beautiful. They're so popular. They're so powerful. How do they do it? And we go, maybe we should sacrifice on the same altars that they did. Or they never give their money away to the poor or whatever. They keep it for themselves. Or we say, well, they never take a day off. They work every day. Maybe we should do that. Well, they seem to be just fine without a church community because, let's be honest, being part of a community of 100 plus people is hard work. It's tiring. It drains my time, my energy. I constantly feel like I'm letting people down. But my friends who are more powerful and successful, they don't have this problem. Maybe I'll treat church at arm's length and I'll go, okay, well, we'll do that. And subtly, slowly, our devotions get turned. And that goes on in every heart, I think. It goes on in my heart. I'm hoping it goes on in your heart, or I'm the only one. And so it isn't easy, but it is simple. And so how do they resolve this? And Moses does two things. He reminds them who God is, and then by implication, he reminds them who they are. And he says, our God is a consuming fire. Our God is a consuming fire. And he says he is a jealous God. And by the way, again, as a little side note, don't you just love Moses' command of language? He's very evocative. He says, you remember God rescued us from the smelting furnace in Egypt. And the fires of Mordor are evoked. And we're only thinking of Sauron and the White Tower, aren't we? I am. The smelting furnace of Egypt. And then he says, but our God is a consuming fire. A jealous God. And in those two things, that statement of who God is, he tells us who God is, but he tells us who we are. Because he says he's a consuming fire. He engulfs everything. He's passionate and he's jealous. And jealousy is a confusing word, because when you hear the word jealous, you think that's negative. How can God be jealous? Isn't God a lovely God? Isn't he like a Santa Claus God? He's a jealous God. And you need to understand what jealousy is, because there's a big difference between jealousy and envy. I'm envious about things I don't have, and I'm jealous of things that are rightfully mine. So if my children go for a sleepover at one of their friends' house, and they come home saying, I don't want to live here anymore, Dad, their house is better. Their dad let me stay up late. He gave me ice cream until it came out of my eyeballs. He never said no to me to do anything I want. I want to live there. And that progressed, and he moved in. As a dad, I would rightly feel jealous for my son's affection. And so I turned my house into a theme park to win him back. Because he's mine. And I'm jealous for his love. in the way that a husband is jealous for his wife's affection and so works hard to earn her love, or vice versa. I've just never seen it work vice versa. I didn't mean that. Not true in my life, but what I've seen. All right. Are we okay? In saying he's a jealous God, he's telling, I've got a head rush. It's all funny until I pass out. In saying he's a jealous God, he's saying you belong to him. So this is who he is. He's a holy, consuming God. So he stresses several times, be careful, pay attention, be diligent with keeping these commands. He's a holy God. He's not Santa Claus that's cuddly. We didn't make him up. He's the God of heaven. And he fired on the mountain and they're all terrified of him. But you're his. So this is who God is. This is who you are. In other words, this is not religion. You haven't got to try to earn your way to God. He's jealous of you because you belong to him. And this right here should blow the lie out of the water that some of you believe. Because there is a lie going around that the God of the Old Testament is different from the God of the New Testament, that the God of the Old Testament was really mean and the God of the New Testament was all peace and love. And yet Moses, in the Old Testament, who wrote 5 books of the Old Testament, he says this in verse 31, "For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not leave you or destroy you or forget the covenant with your fathers that he swore to them." So again, he's told them who God is. He's a merciful God. He's told them who God is, having just said, you're going to do all this wickedness that we've told you not to do, and I'm going to spend the next 30 chapters telling you not to do. You're going to do it all because you're sinners. But he's a merciful God. And he will never forget the covenant that he's made with you. So we've been told 2 things again. This is who God is. He's merciful. This is who you are. You're in covenant with him. God made a promise to his people. And again, it's worth pointing out, God took all the initiative. His people did nothing except disobey him. And he took all the initiative in coming to them. And he said, this unfaithful people here, they're mine. I'm going to make a covenant with them. So we started by saying that Moses told the people, be loyal. But actually, the truth of the matter is that spelled out in chapter 4, we cannot be loyal to God. It's not possible. You think, be loyal to God, listen to God, do as he says, live for God, go. And we're like, yes, I'm going to do it for a day. And then my heart is turned and I desire something else. I want to just please the people around me. I want to be liked by my society. I want to be in with this group of people, and so I'll compromise because I can't. And Moses knows this, God knows this. And so he tells them, our God is a merciful God who always promises to keep covenant with you because God is loyal. Or as we might put it, God is faithful. He doesn't deny himself. This is who he is. The New Testament, the Old Testament, it's all about this great theme of grace. Grace means God's riches at Christ's expense, but it means his, not just his mercy. See, to be merciful is to say, you've done wrong and I've pardoned you. That's mercy. And God has been merciful to you and me. But grace, it says, you've done wrong and I now bless you. I pour grace upon you. In fact, in John chapter 1, talking about who God is and the nature of Jesus, this is what he says. I was reading this just the other day and it just smacked me between the eyes. It's so beautiful. Listen to this. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we've seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father. What is God's glory? What's the glory of God? Is it the fire on the mountain? Is it like the Israelites felt as they stood at Horeb and were just terrified? God's glory? John says, we've seen his glory, full of grace and truth. And then a few verses later, this is what really got me as well. Verse 16, from his fullness, we have all been given grace upon grace. Grace upon grace has been poured out upon his people. When you were far from God, when you didn't care much about him at all, when you lived for self, when everything in the world you thought was to be for you to devour and desire, every time you've tried to say yes to God and actually ended up doing the opposite, every time you've done that and gone astray and you've thought, oh, I don't deserve God, what does he do? He showers you with grace upon grace, pours his generosity, his riches, his blessings, his goodness on you. And so we, like the Israelites before Moses, can stand there and say, you can hear God say, be loyal, be diligent, be careful to keep his commands. But know this, he's loyal. He is faithful. He will shower you with grace upon grace. And we're going to respond together this morning to the amazing grace of God by sharing in the Lord's Supper, in the communion meal that he's given us. Because every Sunday for history, Christians have gathered, often around a dinner table. That's how it should be done. Often around a dinner table, and as part of their meal, they've broken bread and drunk wine, and they've remembered the generosity of God towards them, the grace of God towards them. God is a holy God. God is a merciful God, and we are his people. And actually, I'm going to invite the amazing Aisling up, and she's going to lead us in the song Amazing Grace, the old hymn written by John Newton, who was a former slave owner. And actually, John Newton wrote this hymn, Amazing Grace, while having yet to repent of owning slaves. When he wrote Amazing Grace, he was really repenting of and grateful for God saving him from his gambling addiction. And I mention that because John Newton, by our standards, was hugely compromised. He had a lot to learn. His conscience was hard. His heart was hard in some areas still that the grace of God needed to transform. And that's the case for all of us. There's things that you believe. My microphone's gone, they've had enough. There's things that you believe, things that you do, that you don't know is wrong, but it is. But you don't know that it's wrong, so you do it anyway. And God's grace is still there. He forgives you for the things you know you've done wrong, and he even forgives you for the things you don't know you've done wrong. And so I'm going to invite the Connect team to bring the bread and wine round to you now, and you can stay seated. They'll come and offer it to you. This is a meal for Christians, and so if you're not yet a believer, you can just let this one pass you by. There's no shame in that at all. Instead, as Aisling sings for us, we're going to stay seated. We're going to use this as a chance to express our appreciation and gratitude for the amazing grace of God. That the God of Mount Horeb was also crucified on a hill at Golgotha, at Mount Calvary. And so we remember the God who came down in human form and gave us grace upon grace. Aisling, over to you.